This will rattle some in communist China. Former Chinese President Jiang Zemin, whose followers are called toad followers because of what some say were his amphibian features, died today at the age of 96. Jiang was known for taking over the Communist Party after the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests and massacre. He was China's president for a decade and was credited for taking the country through a time of economic growth. According to Chinese state media, Jiang died of leukemia and multiple organ failure. The timing of Jiang's death could pose potential opportunities and inspiration for protesters in China. Mourning and memorial ceremonies for former leaders are allowed in China, but protesters could use these events to continue to express their dissatisfaction with China's current state of politics. The current protests in China are unlike any other surge of protests in the country since the Tiananmen Square movement. And turning to what is happening on the streets of China, the country's police force is cracking down on protests in multiple cities. Beijing, Shanghai, Wuhan, Guangzhou, all are just a few of the cities where protests have erupted. Protests have been sparked by China's zero-COVID policy and a deadly apartment fire. According to multiple reports, police and vehicles swarm potential protest sites. Some officers are searching citizens' phones for prohibited apps. Other police are entering homes of potential protesters to warn them against illegal activities. Now, look at this video. Chinese officials in white hazmat suits clashing with protesters in the city of Jinan. In this video, protesters and officials are pushing back and forth with shelving units. And as the protests continue for a fifth day, the White House remains cautious, almost quiet, in its response to the protests. Earlier this week, the White House did say that it backs the right of people to peacefully protest, but the White House stopped short of saying anything critical against the Chinese Communist Party and its leader, President Xi Jinping. Senior fellow and director of Chinese strategy at the Hudson Institute and author of the book, The 100-Year Marathon, Michael Pillsbury, joins me. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Greta.
Sir, what does it mean, the death of Jiang Zemin? What does that mean, if anything, to the protests that are going on or to the people of China?
Well, Jiang Zemin is a great hero to the Chinese Communist Party, in part because he supported the use of force to crush the students and workers in Tiananmen Square. That's not all. He then promised, obviously falsely, that China would open its markets and become a free market economy with America in exchange for joining the World Trade Organization. That never happened. The Chinese markets never opened up. They did not keep their promises. In a number of cases, under Jiang Zemin's authority, they actually defied rulings against them. The third thing he's famous for, you have to use a little bit of Chinese Mandarin, Greta, to explain it. It's called nan de hutu. It means plain dumb. He had these gigantic eyeglasses. He has a funny look on his face all the time. And he told Mike Wallace in a very famous 60 Minutes interview that he loved Elvis Presley. He could even sing Elvis Presley songs in English. So he gave the impression of being like a fellow American. And this succeeded wildly. Even though he crushed the students, he still brought massive investment, over $1 trillion in American investment to China, got in the WTO, had a number of other successes. So he is really seen by Xi Jinping as a hero, the guy who can crush students, crush demonstrations, just like today in China, and still become a major contribution to China's long-term goal of being #1 in the world. It's very good you're showing his picture and this idea of being a toad. That was all part of the idea of playing dumb and don't worry about me. He ruthlessly wiped out all of his rivals. They either went to jail or were disappeared. So this Chinese concept of playing dumb and not saying much, it's obviously the way to get to the top. It's quite the opposite of our New Hampshire primary and our Iowa caucus, where you brag about what you've done. This is the opposite, and this guy was a huge success in deceiving the West.
As we look across China and the reports that we're getting out of China, and obviously many of the reports are censored, does it appear to you that these protests are growing, or is that the security forces have really gotten, Xi Jinping has managed to put it down?
I think they're growing, and they've been encouraged by this bold statement by the American ambassador in China, Nick Burns. The statement is quite astonishing. He's departing from Joe Biden. He's departing from the NSC statement of a couple of days ago by Admiral Kirby. He's specifically saying Chinese people have the right to protest. He condemned the attacks on journalists. It's quite a long statement. I think
But isn't
Radio
that what
Free
President
Asia
Biden
is
said?
going to broadcast it back.
Isn't that what President Biden has said, that he supports, peaceful protests? I mean, isn't that what Ambassador Nick Burns said? Isn't that essentially what the president said?
No, Biden hasn't spoken at all, only Admiral Kirby. And he did not mention China, except he said something like all countries in the world, have the right of assembly. The ambassador's statement's much more focused, and it's praising the demonstrations and saying they have a right to do this. Then he had this crucial phrase, which may get him fired. Their right to protest should not be interfered with. Now, that's a direct attack on Xi Jinping. Ambassadors don't usually do that. I was named President Trump's ambassador to China if he got a second term, and I'd have to think twice about opposing the president the way he's done just now.
Michael Pillsbury, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Greta. Let's keep watching this story.
All right, indeed. 280 days since Russia invaded Ukraine, thousands have been killed.